I know what his numbers are right now. He's got really, he's going to, if he becomes the nominee, he will become the least popular major party nominee in the history of us measuring the popularity of major party nominees, going back to the 1930s. Right? I mean, right now, his among all registered voters across the country, 60% have an unfavorable view of Donald Trump. And we've just never seen, I mean, Hillary Clinton, if it weren't for Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton might actually have earned that honor, right? Because she's in the 50s who have an unfavorable opinion of her. And there are a couple other, her husband being one of them, who had poor ratings when they started out as the nominee during that campaign. But we're going to see nothing like Donald Trump if he's able to pull this off. So, you know, it's still possible for him to be on target for getting the 1,237 delegates he needs to win a first-round ballot. But anyway, one of the things that was fascinating, particularly taking it back here to New Jersey, for me, as I said, you know, I sit in diners, right? So if we're going to poll nationally, I got to go sit in somebody else's diner. So, and it wasn't diners, it was, now I can't remember the name, the Pizza Ranch, if anybody's ever been out to Iowa. The Pizza Ranch chain seems to be the place that you have to go to sit down and listen to people. There are diners up in New Hampshire, so I was spending, and they all have the red in them, the Red Arrow Diner, the Red Barn Diner, the red. So I was in every red diner there was in New Hampshire. And then the same thing is that the approach being is that I wanted to hear what people had to say before they started voting. And I actually, you know, you gleaned a lot, you understood a lot about what was potentially going to happen. It became clear, even though Ben Carson himself supported Trump when he dropped out, Ben Carson's supporters did not support Trump, and they were never going to do that. They wanted an outsider, but and Trump was antithetical to the approach that they saw was important to an outsider. So they've swung to Cruz. Marco Rubio was another interesting character in this race because I saw all along when I talked to people who weren't necessarily, and this is the great thing also about when you go to New Hampshire and Iowa and you go to these events with candidates, and sometimes there's only, you know, a dozen people in the room, and sometimes there's 50 or 100 people in the room. But when you go to those events, those are not like, you know, you go to Christie Town Hall here and it's packed with people who support Governor Christie, right? But you go up there, that's not the case. These are people who are actually on the fence, really looking around, trying to figure out who the candidates are. I remember one day I went to 4 or 5 different events in southern New Hampshire, and I kept seeing this little boy with a coonskin cap on. And I realized, okay, so it was a whole group of it. It was 2 fathers with their kids. And they were doing the same thing that I was doing, except they were doing it because they were voters. And they said, we picked today, we took the kids out of school today, and today was the day we were going to take them to see all the different presidential candidates, so we could decide who we might want to support in the primary. It's just fascinating. You really, you know, you hear this talked about, this engagement with politics. In these states, New Hampshire even much more than Iowa. And it's true. These people really are up to the last minute. In fact, I kept, once I started spotting these guys over and over again, every time I asked, so what do you think, whoever the candidate was that time? Oh, I really liked what he had to say. So now I'm thinking maybe it's him, but I'm not sure yet. They knew that that everyone was going to impress them, and it was going to take them a while to decide. So that whole thing about, so, you know, the poll, that's why it's so hard to poll these early, particularly these early primaries, is that people really, a significant number of voters really will change their mind in the last 24 hours. It really does. It does happen. It's not, we're not just making, pollsters aren't just making this up to cover our backsides when we get something wrong, right? This actually happens in places like Iowa and New Hampshire. It doesn't happen everywhere, but in places like that. So the thing about Marco Rubio that was interesting was that he was never the first choice of anybody I talked to, but he was always the second choice, and he was always the second choice for one reason, which I put down to the grandmother vote. Is that he seems like such a nice young man. It really was it. It was really, that was it. It was like, so if I'm not going to vote for this person, I think I might vote for Marco Rubio because he seems like a good guy, like he seems like a nice guy. It really was that. They couldn't give you any other reason, which was, and Marco Rubio was never able to move beyond that. So when he started to try to get some traction in the polls, in the end, there really wasn't more there for him. So he kept trying a whole bunch of different things, and obviously it didn't work because there was no real anchor that voters held on to with Marco Rubio. Now, our own governor was another interesting case, and met people up in New Hampshire who did really like him. But here was somebody who just, there wasn't a space for him in this particular election cycle because of what had happened. He had been crowded out from every side. The truth teller, that's Donald Trump. You know, the insider who knows how to run a state, well, you got Jeb Bush. You got John Kasich, right? Somebody who can be the big tent Republican, who can bring together Latino voters, well, you got Marco Rubio there. Right? He even tried the conservative tack for a while. Just, you know, there were others there who could do it better. Now, wouldn't have necessarily been that way, even with Donald Trump in the race. If we go back to his reelection bid in 2013, and I won't go into that right now. We can talk about that if you have any questions about it. But one question that I keep getting asked is, did he miss his chance in 2012? And the answer to that is no, he did not. People who said that they were going to support him in 2012 would not have ended up supporting him if he actually ran, because they would have had pressure put on them by the party leadership to stay with Romney and not flirt with Christie, and Christie would have been left hanging out on his own in 2012. He might be rethinking that right now, but he knew that at the time. And his whole strategy was gearing up for a big 2013 win here in New Jersey and using that as his springboard. So anyway, you know, so that's the Republican side, and the most amazing thing is that we've seen, and mentioned it here, that you've never seen a front runner who the political party establishment is so frightened of.